Good morning, everyone. Thank you, thank you. Good morning. I'm Tamiko Brown-Nagin, Dean of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you, both in person or online, to our Radcliffe Day 2026 celebration. Each day on Radcliffe Day, we gather as a community to recognize an individual whose life and work embody the Institute's commitment to excellence and impact, ideals we carry forward from our proud history as Radcliffe College. Today, we're honoring the path-breaking scholar, educator, and three-time university president, Ruth J. Simmons, for her extraordinary and transformational leadership in higher education. Later today, Ruth will engage in a keynote conversation with another path-breaking leader in higher education, the Radcliffe Institute's inaugural dean and Harvard President Emerita Drew Gilpin-Faust. I'll introduce them both more fully this afternoon. We'll also hear a recorded testimonial by former First Lady Michelle Obama, and I'll conclude the day's festivities by formally presenting the Radcliffe Medal to Ruth Simmons. But first, in keeping with Radcliffe Day tradition, we'll start our program with a panel discussion. Each year, we select a topic that resonates with our honorees' life and work, and today our panel will consider the qualities of impactful leadership. As a university president, Ruth's courageous, principled leadership has strengthened higher education. As an educator and mentor, Ruth has shaped generations of leaders who look to her successful example. The elements of successful leadership have long been the subject of extensive scholarly research and lively discussion. We look to leaders to effect change and navigate challenges, and leaders' success is defined not by title or position, but by their ability to articulate a vision and to motivate and equip others to realize shared goals. Great leaders use a variety of philosophies and strategies to achieve these aims, and today we have the opportunity to hear from a distinguished group whose exemplary leadership spans higher education, sports, economic policy, and the arts. Our panel will be moderated by John Palfrey, president of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. An esteemed educator, author, legal scholar, and innovator, he has extensive experience across multiple sectors. John is an expert in how new media is changing learning, education, and other institutions, and he's published extensively on the effects of new technologies on society. His most recent book, co-authored with Esther Harate, is titled Wired Wisdom: How to Age Better Online. In just a moment, John will introduce our panelists, so let me close by saying how grateful I am to John and to each of our esteemed guests for being here today and sharing their perspectives with us. Please join me in warmly welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you, Dean Brown-Nagin, and thanks to the Radcliffe Institute staff for putting on such a celebratory day for us all. Thank you for the invitation to moderate this panel on leadership with these extraordinary individuals from whom we'll hear in a moment. And thank you most of all for the chance to be among the many many people who have traveled here from near and far to honor the 2026 Radcliffe Medalist, Dr. Ruth Simmons. In sports, talk radio jocks will refer to a very special athlete and team leader as a franchise player, right, Val? As in, Caitlin Clark is a franchise player for the Indiana Fever. In politics, there's a phrase that journalists use to describe an unusual talent that comes along only once in a while. That person is a, quote, generational talent, as in Barack Obama, or Michelle Obama, is a generational talent. But I'm not so sure in academia if we have such a phrase. President Garber, Provost Manning, do we have such a phrase? I couldn't think about one. Maybe Dean Minow has one. We don't really have a phrase in academia for a generational talent. But do you know what we have in academia? What we have Dr. Ruth Simmons. There are many words and phrases that would aptly describe Dr. Simmons, a scholar of Romance, language, and literature, by the way, so one is inspired to choose one's words with care to describe Dr. Simmons, this year's Radcliffe Medalist. She is what the kids today would call an icon in the professional worlds that I inhabit, academia, philanthropy, and civil rights. She has been many firsts along the way, as I'm sure we'll hear described throughout the day. She is a bona fide trailblazer. But I would add a descriptive phrase of my own from seeing Dr. Simmons up close in a boardroom. One great privilege of being a foundation president has been to work with an extraordinary board of directors at MacArthur Foundation, many of whom, past and present, join me here today to honor Dr. Simmons. The words that I would choose carefully to describe her are deeply wise and kind. She is, in fact, unlike any board member I've ever witnessed. How so? I think Bill Lee will agree with me. I believe she is likely, in any board meeting, to be the person who listens the most carefully, speaks the fewest times, and to whom other people listen most intently. It's a phenomenon I have never quite seen before. It is something to behold, a quiet and profound leadership lesson for us all. Inspired by Dr. Simmons and her work and legacy, this panel is about the special kinds of leadership that we need in all of our communities today. We are fortunate indeed to be joined by 4 exceptional leaders, each from a field of work and a mode of activation that enables them to speak to the aspects of the leadership legacy of Dr. Simmons. We are joined by Dr. Paula A. Johnson, by training a cardiologist, currently serving as the 14th president of Wellesley College. Welcome. Raphael Bostic, a leading economist who's recently retired as president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Deborah Borda, who began as a musician in her own right, who served as the president of the New York Philharmonic and guided that institution through both the pandemic and major building projects all at the same time. And finally, not least, Val Ackerman, commissioner of the Big East Athletic Conference, founding president of the WNBA, professional athlete herself, who recently announced that she will step down from the Big East in August. Val, welcome. Okay, here's how it's going to go. The first round of questions is going to be to ask our panel to talk about their leadership story. So if you'll play along with me, what I would love for each of you to do is to think about the way in which you've come to lead today, but your audience is somebody who is an undergraduate or a graduate who has either just graduated yesterday or is about to go into the workforce. What kind of a lesson would you offer for them about your own leadership story? So Paula, if you would, please start us off with your leadership story in medicine and in academia.
Thank you, John. And I just want to say what an honor it is to be on this panel with my esteemed panelists and with you, John. So I would, in reflecting on my own career, I would say that my leadership journey has really been one of having extraordinary mentorship along the way and really being able to tap into those mentors who have enabled me to see where change is possible and then to have the courage to step into that space and actually move that change forward. And, from the very beginning, we all have an origin story. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and there are always people from Brooklyn. But just starting, I was very fortunate to have a family and a mother who really believed that it was, and she was not college educated, but believed that her two daughters would have the opportunity to think about whatever it is they wanted to do and to say, you could step into that. So from Brooklyn, I landed at Harvard. And I'm just going to point to a professor, because I think we have the ability in our institutions to provide transformative experiences in ways that we might not even imagine. So I took a seminar in my first year with Ruth Hubbard, who was the first woman to become tenured as in the biology department. And the course was, and I'm going to give you the number because it was so memorable, and there are many of my colleagues who took the same course, Bio 109, Biology and Women's Issues. And it was a transformative experience. I understood that, science was founded basically and done on a very male model. And I did not know at the time that that would really serve as a foundation for my work in academic medicine, thinking about women's health and sex differences in health and disease. So onward to entering medicine, having mentors that, peer mentors that were incredibly important, and peer mentorship is something that we focus on, fostering. But then really thinking about who were those people who opened my eyes to a research career and to answering the big questions in medicine and stepping into what a future of medicine and academia could look like. And those are people like Lee Goldman, Jean Brownwald, who just passed away, unfortunately, lived an incredibly strong and long life. But people who had faith in what my abilities were and encouraged me to ask the difficult questions. And then as I moved into higher education, to take yet a different step. So that journey of mentorship, again, helping to encourage me to ask the hard questions and then to step into those potential places where you could make a difference, I think is something that I'm so grateful for.
It's an amazing story. Thank you. Raphael, you have led in so many ways through your career, but one thing that links you to Dr. Simmons' legacy is, as some people may know, she is on a Fed board, and you have been president. We've been involved in the Fed in many ways, but you are president of a Fed bank until your recent retirement. Would you please talk about your leadership journey?
Sure, happy to. First of all, good morning, everyone. It's really good to see you all. It's actually a privilege to be here. I want to thank the Institute for the invitation to be part of a program to celebrate a true icon. It's actually a personal privilege. When I think of my journey, it starts pretty much the same place that Paula does, sort of at home. And my mother, my father, my great aunt, the notion that we had to do education to its greatest effect and be excellent, be 200% better, was just baseline stuff, and that became table stakes for pursuing everything that I did after that. I think, as I think about the rest of my career, there's some bits of luck involved. So my first job out of graduate school, I got a job at the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. I happened to be on a team that had 4 people. They were all radically different people. We had a libertarian, a 60s hippie, but my boss had the idea that everybody works together, and if your name's on the paper, you have to be okay with every word in the paper. And so that meant that the 4 of us had to figure it out. And figuring out wasn't always easy. It certainly wasn't quiet. We had a lot of yelling and screaming. But when the papers were done, all the unspoken ideology was not there. Everything that could have been like a secret message was ironed out. And so it was actually a pretty pure piece of work. And people hated our papers, but they used them all the time. because that became sort of the standard of what was actually true and real without another agenda. And this idea that by incorporating the viewpoints and the energy of everyone, you got to excellent output was an animating idea for the rest of my career. The second thing I would say is I've had the fortune or misfortune to be running institutions at times where there were big crises and we actually needed every person's best work. And leadership for me then became, how do you get every person to be their best selves, to do the best work of their lives? I'm at HUD during the housing crisis. I'm at the Fed at a time when we have COVID and we think the economy is going to collapse. And so my job was basically to create that foundation. And to do that, I tried to have a relationship with every person on the staff. I tried to be the blocker for the things that were preventing them from being great. I tried to get them to own the institution as much as I did. And I wanted them to imagine and have ambition and inspiration of themselves and what they could bring to the team. And what I found has been incredibly gratifying for me personally about humanity in general, and you start here at Harvard actually, people can be great. People will rise to the challenge. And there is so much talent that's out there, and there are so many people who honestly have never been asked to be great, but when asked, step up and do it. Amazing things happen.
Amazing, thank you. Beautiful story. Deborah, a musician yourself, you have led at the highest level of arts in the country. Please tell us about your leadership journey.
Good morning, everybody. How are you all doing on this beautiful day? Fantastic, fantastic. Well, here's my main advice for graduates, and in fact, to all of us. Life doesn't go quite as you expected. There are always going to be changes. From my first memories, I loved music. I heard it on the radio, and my aspiration came to be, I would be a professional violinist. Drum roll of suspense. And I put my entire focus, I learned discipline. This is what I did. I would be a musician. And I was actually quite successful at it. I was certainly not Heifetz or anything approaching it, but I could make a living. But then I asked, you might ask me, what was the call to leadership? And I'll talk about that in a minute. But I still think of myself as a musician. I am a musician. I have to make critical judgments all the time. But I think of myself as a citizen musician. And I hope we can all think about ourselves in whatever we choose to follow, that we are citizens first, whether of the arts or politics or education. I was studying at the Royal College of Music in London, and I was at the Tate Gallery. I remember this very well. And it was back when there was one Tate Gallery. That's how long ago it was. And I was walking around, and I saw a picture that absolutely captivated me. It was called Hope. And it was by an artist who I had never heard of. His name was George Frederick Watts. He died in the early 1900s. He had the name George Frederick because he was born on the day of Handel's birthday, so George Frederick Watts. And it was a picture of the globe. And there was a woman sitting on top of it, sort of mused, blindfolded, and in her arms, she had a harp. And the harp had a single string. And she was about to play it. And I thought, that is hope. That is the hope that art and beauty play in our lives. And it is so easy to give it up and not let it just flow through the fabric of our lives. So as a 25-year-old, I decided, of course, I could change the world. And I was very concerned that there was a kind of elitist vision of what we would call classical music. It's, in fact, an incorrect term. But more than that, that there was absolutely now an increasing, absence of music and art education in the schools. So an enormous amount of people, whether at higher education or not, were being deprived of something that Gustavo Dudamel described to me, which is that music and art are a fundamental human right. Music and art are a fundamental human right. So I decided, as a citizen musician, and by the way, Yo-Yo Ma made up that title. Thank you, Yo-Yo. I would do something about it. And I always tried to create change. And my change had to do with building new halls that brought people into the hall, and we'll talk about that later, to bring brilliant new talent who wouldn't have been there before, Gustavo Dudamel. And just the other day, Elim Chan, 35-year-old new music director of the San Francisco Symphony, first woman to run a major orchestra. And we founded YOLA, which is bringing El Sistema to the United States. We'll talk maybe more about how I helped inspire people to follow that. And I will say that in the places where I've been lucky enough to serve, our motto was always, excellence is innovation, and innovation is excellence. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And Val, you have gone from professional athlete to the highest levels of sports administration. Will you please tell us about your leadership story?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, John, and great to be with all of you. I want to thank the Radcliffe Institute for the invitation and commend Dr. Simmons on an incredible career and the well-deserved recognition today. When I think about my path, as has been noted by my colleagues, I think it does go back to upbringing. My little bit of history, my grandmother on my mother's side was an immigrant from what was then called Czechoslovakia. She was Slovak. Came to the U.S., met my grandfather here. They turned out to be from neighboring villages in the high Tatra Mountains. They got married and moved to western Pennsylvania, where my grandfather was a coal miner, and my grandmother ran the boarding house where all of the Eastern European coal miner families lived. She died when I was 12. She never spoke English, at least not to me. I know a few Slovak phrases. But she was bigger than life to me. And the idea that she came over to the US when she was, I think, 15 by herself. A relative bought her passage. And I just remember thinking, my gosh, this is the most courageous woman I think I'll ever know. And that's turned out to be true. My mother was the youngest of 8, first in her family to go to college. So I sort of got that going on this side of the family. And then my father was a high school athletic director, as was my grandfather. So I had these two strains of sports, this intense interest in sports, and my father was very nurturing of my career in the way pre-Title IX days. And then I've got my mother and my grandmother's sort of legacy as strong women on the other side. And so, I guess all of that was just sort of, forming itself in me. And so then, my life evolved. I played sports growing up. My dad was very supportive. I went to the University of Virginia on a scholarship in the early years of Title IX. At the time, we shared the one and only scholarship at UVA for the basketball team. Here's how it worked. I got tuition and fees, and a teammate got room and board. So I got to go to class, and she got to eat. So we had this sharing deal going on. And then it got better every year. And so for somebody like me to have lived the journey of women's sports in this country over the last 40 or 50 years has been extraordinary. My leadership journey was unplanned. I didn't ever expect to be doing what I'm doing. I had good mentorship as well that made my career possible. I think for the young people in the audience, my counsel is work hard, be a great teammate, take advantage of opportunities to learn. Intellectual curiosity is so important in every field, including in sports. So much is happening now in the sports world. So many disciplines are intersecting in our space, so you've got to be a little bit of a jack of all, and so that requires constant learning. I also was very moved, I have been for a long time, about the role of sports in society. In fact, my senior thesis at Virginia was on the role of sports in American society, how sports, maybe like some, but unlike other institutions, has this unique ability to bring people together and to allow bridges to be built and people of different backgrounds to sort of join in cheering their team in healthy ways. And certainly the ability of girls and women now to have sports become part of their lives is also an important thread of that. So for me, the ability to work in this field, to be my true self, to be authentic, has really characterized what I've been able to do, and I've had a very lucky journey for that reason.
Val, every young person in this audience is lucky to hear what you just said. Those are incredibly powerful lessons, and thank you for sharing them so generously today. We're now going to pivot to a couple of issues that I hope each of you will unpack, and which will speak both to the legacy of Dr. Simmons and to the work that each of you have done. And the three big I's are innovation, inclusion, and institutions, and we'll go through each of them, and you can each talk to them or not, but we'll be in conversation. I'm going to start with the topic of innovation and thinking about this in the spirit of the way that this university and this institute and Dr. Simmons have led in so many different areas of inquiry. Also thinking about the ways in which a young person could thrive in this era of innovation. I think, Val, about your story, we talk about AI coming into the workforce. Sports may be one area where the humans are, pretty central to that enterprise, or the arts and otherwise. And so how might a young person think about where the opportunities lie in a time of innovation? My hunch is that each of you have some great answers. We could start with any of you, but I am going to start with Deborah, since you mentioned the topic of innovation in your opening remarks. And as you have gone from the Handel and Haydn Society just across the river here in your early jobs to your more recent leadership of the New York Philharmonic, what kind of a role has innovation played? And I think you gave us at least some breadcrumbs that you're going to talk about performance and putting people into spaces that they have not been in before.
I think innovation starts with coming from a position where it's not that you're expecting people to come to the art, but you're inviting them into it. So one of the very particular ways that we like to think about it was, and I was fortunate to work on building a brand new symphony hall with Frank Gehry, who was a remarkable and inspirational genius. And what we came together in working towards was to create a hall that enveloped people, that actually surrounded the orchestra. But the other part of it was to think about halls that had other ways of access, not just through beauty, but also, for example, when we redid David Geffen Hall in New York, we put an enormous screen in the lobby. And if you go to the lobby today, you'll see that there are literally hundreds of people who come and sit and listen to concerts for free. They bring their lunch or their dinner, they bring their dogs, they bring their children, and we hired a director so that it's actually really well done. I think also innovation and thinking about how we program. You don't always have to do an intermission at a concert. You can have a theme. These things sound very basic, but they actually weren't done. And then finally, and this may not sound innovative, it's sad that it does, was to try to open the door for talents who would not have had the door open to them, like a 24-year-old Gustavo Dudamel or a young Elim Chan. And so one of the points I made was whenever we had a young people's concert, which we would do on many, many Saturdays, I always made sure that a woman conducted that concert. Because if the first time a little boy or a little girl goes into a concert to see music, it will change their whole perspective if they see a woman conducting. So I mean, these are just some of the things that we do. And I mean, my grandmothers were all very important to us. I was telling Val before that the first time I flew on a plane, my grandmother took me and I said, "Oh, I want to be a pilot." And she said, "No, you'll be a stewardess." Then she took me to church. We went every Sunday. I said, "I'd like to be the Pope." She said, "No, you'll be a nun." Well, that didn't look nice. Anyway, so the innovation of a woman pope has still not happened.
I guess sometimes you don't listen to your mentors and have to push through, right? Your story about platforming and allowing people who have not been seen in that role, echoing what Raphael said, makes me think a lot about the MacArthur Fellowship, the thing that we give out as Radcliffe does a fellowship here. And very often when we think about finding the creative and effective individuals who get this award, it's often somebody who has been operating at an excellent level in plain sight, but has not been brought to the public attention. And it might be a woman in science. That's a typical one for us, a woman in a field of science where women have not been central, as Dr. Johnson has, of course. But all of a sudden, they get a better lab at their university. All of a sudden, the federal grants, should there be any federal grants, start going their way. And so I do think this is a form of innovation that's so important. Raphael, may I turn to you next for the role of innovation in your leadership journey?
Sure. I loved your stories because to me they really made a strong point that a lot of innovation doesn't have to be like a 5,000 step move. Incremental things can lead to learning that then translates into a direction that then becomes a broader innovation. And so at the bank, we always talked about, how do you make this meeting the next time we have it 5% better? Like, what are small things that could become a collective that then leads to a bigger change or a bigger experience or broader impact? How do you think about small ways that you might be related to the people around you, the communities next to you? What are small needs that you might be able to fill in low-cost ways that then can lead to new conversations? All of those are innovation. And, for the young people, put ideas out there, throw them out there. Don't be afraid to fail, because there is learning in failure. But for the old people, let failure happen, create environments where those new ideas get heard and considered seriously, so that you wind up with a synergy that allows an institution to benefit from the best and the hardest thinking of everyone. Because I've met so many people, I've been in organizations where there are lots of good ideas there, and no one felt safe to say them. And so we never benefited by them. And so there is this role of the nature of the environment that people live and work that becomes critical.
There are so many insights in what you just said. One, I think, is the situational nature of advice as well, which is for maybe an older leader to embrace some more radical change, and for a younger leader to see that there may be incremental moves that make a huge difference, right, to a field. Paula, you lead with real innovation at Wellesley College. You have substantial challenges in the field of higher education around sustainability and so forth, but I feel like your focus on sustainable excellence is a great example of innovation in higher ed, either on that topic or otherwise. How do you think about it?
So it's a really important question right now, and I feel like I'm sitting obviously in front of Dr. Simmons, in front of Drew and Alan, who are enormous leaders. And our institutions are places, when you talk about innovations, we provide the petri dish for innovation in terms of the knowledge production, in terms of what we provide our students with an outstanding education, and what they go out into the world and do. So I view my job and the job of our leadership and our board as to making sure that these institutions continue to have that level of sustainable excellence as institutions. Because while we create a lot of change within the institution through the people who are here and when they leave, the institutions themselves, I would say, are a bit resistant. And so how do we meet the challenges of today, which are numerous, whether it's the attack on higher education, the multiple attacks, whether it's the financial challenges that we all face with a situation in which the foundation that higher ed has been built on is not one that necessarily works, and we have to be very vigilant about it. How do we lead in an era of AI as an institution, having to defend ourselves, as well as the nature of leadership in our institutions in focusing on crisis after crisis after crisis, while also setting a longer-term vision and working towards it. So I do think our main focus has got to be, how do we create the strength in our institutions to weather so many changes and so many attacks? How do we listen intently and understand what the opportunities for institutional change are? How do we ensure that we have the financial sustainability to create the conditions for what is so unique and special about higher education in the United States? And then how do we listen for the places where we might have lost our way? I think raising, again, the civic purpose of higher education, really thinking deeply about that, thinking deeply about what it means for our students, what it means for our faculty, and what it means as an institution that is so strongly rooted in the democratic tradition and critically important for the future of democracy. So for me, right now, it's really thinking about the institutional change, creating that vision, but also the buy-in from everyone who is within our institutions, and then working with our colleagues across institutions to face the challenges.
Well, I so admire the way that you, alongside Drew and Alan and others, have led during this period, and we'll come back to the importance of institutions at the end, so I look forward to hearing your thought on that. Val, before we conclude on innovation, I think under this tent, it's safe to say only one of us has been the founding president of a major new league. So I think you've got innovation covered. But how have you thought about that as part of your work and journey?
Well, John, that would be my example here. I was very fortunate when I worked at the NBA for 16 years to be led by a very progressive commissioner, David Stern, the longtime commissioner, who was, frankly, a commissioner's commissioner. He really had the ability, he's a brilliant guy, he was a lawyer, he could look around corners, and he really positioned the NBA, I think, beautifully as something more than a sports league. So under his leadership, the league became active in technology, in community service, and I'll forever be indebted to him for this. He implicitly understood the importance of women to the game of basketball. And so, thank you. And so the when I think of innovation, I think about courage and I think about risk, because that's what was needed, and and the risk taking was what was required when the league launched now 30 years ago. It was. And here we are now, really, with the fruits beginning to finally be, revealed to us. It's really only been, I'd say, in the last few years that we've really understood, and you mentioned Caitlin Clark, the power of women as role models, their impact on fans everywhere. And so, but it took a lot of work to get to that point. Societal changes were necessary in order for some of the things that are happening today to happen. But that was just an amazing experience to be part of. The second piece of this, I would just say quickly, is the sports business is in a constant state of evolution. I think AI will impact our business at some point. The good news for my work is that the people who play sports probably can't be replaced by avatars, because people want to come and see actually live human beings. That's the point of a live sports event. Performing their craft. But there are other ways, I'm sure, that AI will transform our business. And so all of us that are involved have to keep our eye on that. The last thing I'll note is college sports right now is going through tremendous change. And the easiest way to explain it is there has been so much money that has come into the sector from at the highest levels, think mostly high-level football, that the athletes at some point turned around and said, hey, wait a minute, there's all this money slushing around. Coaches are getting paid this. I'm on television. I'm performing in front of tens of thousands of people. And, they in effect said, all I'm getting is a scholarship, which is, for all of us who believe in the value of an education, that's, it's not what you want to hear. But that's really how it came to be. And so now as we're evolving through this, this changing relationship between athletes and their schools, everybody in the space has to learn how to be adaptive. That's number one. And I do think there's going to continue to be much room and need for innovation in order to make sure that the things that make college sports so special aren't lost.
Well, Val, you've done such an amazing job navigating the Big East through the NIL process, and we are a Harvard family in my group. Some gathered here today, but we're also a Red Storm family in New York. So Big East fans
Johnny.
too. Well done. I might, if it's okay, stick with you, Val, for my next question to start off. I'm sorry to have you keep working, but I think you may be, in some ways, sort of to carry on your thought. But as we think about inclusion, I probably don't need to say anything about the importance of Radcliffe to anybody here or online, the role that the Radcliffe Institute, but before that, Radcliffe College has played in the field of inclusion. And of course, as a trailblazer, Dr. Simmons, I think, stands for this proposition. But one of the big parts of your story as well is how Title IX has been something that you at once embodied and have also carried out through your work and legacy. And I wonder how you think about inclusion as a part of leadership, which even despite the slings and arrows of the moment, you have clung to and continue to lead through.
Well, I'd say, John, I think about it every day. I mean, as a woman who grew up at a time when girls and women couldn't play sports, or if they did, I remember in basketball we were talking about it, I think with Drew earlier, you had 6-person basketball because women were too delicate to run the full length of the court, so half of you played defense, the other half played offense. I mean, seriously. Like, what was that all? What was that all about? To see now where women have come, and I credit Title IX, and I had the honor early in my career of meeting Senator Bai and Patsy Mink, who were the co-sponsors of that important federal law, one co-sponsored in the Senate, U.S. Senate, and the other in the U.S. House. And so that has opened so many doors, and I think, you know, the role of women in sports has been a bit of a metaphor for women in society. And there's, in fact, an important correlation between women who play sports, organize sports, and then go on and become successful in other walks of life. There's data on this. So I think, you know, for me, women in sport is important, but it's not just the playing part. I mean, my crusade has of late been more about women in leadership in sports. There's more of us than there used to be. I find myself still the only woman in the room sometimes, which I have gotten used to, but I'd like to see that change before my last breath. And I am worried about the direction that the turn things seem to have taken in our country, because at least in my space, it's critically important that we have more women and people of color in leadership positions in sports. It's absolutely essential. And so I really have made it my business to be an advocate for that, to be a mentor to young people who are coming up so they have some tools. They have the benefit of experience of someone like me, the perspectives, et cetera, so they can navigate their own journey. It's not easy for anybody, but I think we've got to just continue to do our part. And so, again, I want to commend Dr. Simmons for being such a trailblazer in this area. You really are a shining light for all of us as we continue to try to carry on your legacy.
Hear, hear. Deborah, I know you have thoughts on this. You both have been a first yourself. You have created inclusion for many others, and I was hearing you speak with Val earlier about what has happened even in your lifetime that you have seen, and yet what remains on the table to be done.
See, I'd like to think about inclusion in a sort of very large sense of not just diversity of color or religion, but socioeconomic diversity. I was fortunate enough to travel to Venezuela many times to learn about an incredible educational system called El Sistema, and it was a place that took really children that came from underserved, not underserved, they could be dressed in rags, communities, and taught them how to play instruments. And you could go to the furthest reaches into actually the jungles of Venezuela, and you could hear an incredible orchestra play Beethoven, Mahler. And one of the interesting things was actually when a child first learned to play and they couldn't play, they would put them in the back of the violin section and put soap on their bows so that they could fake playing, but that's how they learned. Eventually they played. So I went there many times to see this, and I know the founder, or he's now passed away, Jose Antonio Abreu. And I was trying to get Gustavo Dudamel at that point to sign a contract to be music director, where you saw him at the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and he was a 24 or 5-year-old nobody with very big hair and the most brilliant talent I'd ever seen. And I couldn't get the guy to sign the contract. He just wouldn't do what he was thinking about. And I think the Boston Symphony's chasing after him at that point. And I remember getting on a plane to fly back to Los Angeles. And I don't usually do this, but I literally made a vow to myself, that if I couldn't bring Dudamel to Los Angeles, I would bring El Sistema. And I did that, but we didn't call it El Sistema. We did it in an American version. And the important part was we went to underserved neighborhoods in all different areas of the city. And we brought kids in, and the point was not to get them to be able to play in the New York Philharmonic or the Los Angeles Philharmonic. That would be great if they could. My point was, and Gustavo's point was, that they would grow up to be policemen or doctors or lawyers or whatever they could do. And they would have a love for music because we had brought them to music. The greatest indicator of whether you perform in the arts is, did you play an instrument? Did you play in a band? Did you sing in a chorus? And it's like playing on a team. It takes teamwork. And it was remarkably, it was transformative. There are now literally thousands of kids enrolled. We call it Youth Orchestra LA. I got Frank Gehry to design a special home office, not office, a home building. And to me, that was a way of thinking about inclusion in a larger sense, because it's very easy to kind of silo it. And it's right now, as we see the stratification within our society in this country, it is so important that as scholars and doctors and people in finance and sports or in the arts, that we as citizens do something very specific, that we agree, I will do this, and I will move it forward in that way. And that's the way I like to think about inclusion now in that broader sense.
I totally agree. Raphael, before I come to you, just to highlight something that I think both of you said so powerfully about inclusion is the connection between teamwork and working together in these environments, particularly as young people. And when I was head of a high school, one of the things that I would say to kids was, don't overlook the power of a turkey sandwich. And the point actually had to do with the ways in which, when kids are on a bus, they're on the girls' basketball team, and they have that either dry or super soggy turkey sandwich that they've been given in cellophane wrap to eat on the bus as they're going, but they're with their teammates. They will never forget the turkey sandwich. Maybe it's the same thing, you're in the orchestra or you're in a singing group, you're on that same bus with the sandwich as you go from place to place. But the way in which that brings people together for a lifetime is as powerful, I think, as anything we ever give them in a classroom. So thank you for bringing that up. Raphael, as you have led as a powerful voice of inclusion, how have you seen that as a part of your leadership?
So I'll say a couple things. So first, thanks both to you, because then I don't have to say those things. You can just look at their remarks, do a search and replace, add in economics, finance, and public policy, and it's all true. We don't have enough women and people of color in finance, in economics, public policy. Those voices don't inform how we think about how the world works enough. Those voices are not there to challenge thoughts about that people may have about different communities that are born out of not having experience with them. And there are so many questions that we need to be asking that are not being asked because the people who understand the nature of those questions the best are not there, and that's a problem. I would also say, for me, the discussions around inclusion in the last several years have been quite distressing, because I think they have been a distraction from what inclusion is actually trying to achieve, which is to get every person in our society to be their best selves, to create an environment where people can find the pathway that allows them to do the best work that they can. And as opposed to a zero sum, we're trading out, you're gonna get some, and that means you're not gonna get any. That's not why we're doing this. And for me, one of the things I tried to do for every group and every person I've talked to is say, you have to find your path. And you need to have people around you, and we need to do the work to make sure that it's easy for people to see all the possible paths they can pursue so we can get that greatness. And the strongest organizations, the strongest work I've ever done has been inclusive work. And I've just seen it in my personal life, and I've seen it in the institutions around us and in the communities, in fact. And there's a lot of research on an economic side that says diverse, inclusive communities are more innovative, they're more resilient, they're more productive, they're just more. And so we need more.
I couldn't agree more. The insanity of the attack right now on diversity, equity, inclusion in higher ed, in any field, is that the research is so clear that excellence for organizations is tied to being diverse. It is just evident. And why we would turn our back on that as a society, one of the many reasons I think that is so crazy. Dr. Johnson, I'm going to come to you last, but if I might take a personal point just to lead into it. Of course, you have lots of things to say in higher ed, but you have a particular role in academic medicine as well. And I'm honored to be on the stage for many reasons on Radcliffe Day, but one is that my mom is here, who is class of 1967 at Radcliffe. And she was... admitted to Radcliffe College in 1963 and then graduated, I think, among the last class to be Radcliffe per se. But then she went into academic medicine as one of relatively few women in her medical school class. I'm delighted that my daughter, Emmeline, is also in the class of 27. She's here today and she's studying neuroscience. And so I see in my own house, my own home, the trajectory of what it is possible to be in medicine. And I imagine in your life, in cardiologist, you probably weren't surrounded by lots of other women cardiologists at the time that you were getting it done, much less women of color cardiologists.
True. There weren't many. But it was people like Jodie. Jodie, it is so wonderful to have you here, who did pave the way and who were important role models as I came through. We could probably spend an entire session talking about inclusion and the issues that we're facing today. I'm just going to make two quick points. One is, my career in academic medicine really focused on this issue of who is included and who is not included in science and medicine. And that when we exclude populations, women, underrepresented minorities, we actually get the wrong answers. That we really must have the inclusion in order to advance the science in a way that, quite frankly, is accurate and is using the resources that we are given to come to the best conclusions that we can for the entirety of the population. But let me turn to higher education for a few minutes, because I do think the assault on DEI is something that is quite dangerous. And inclusion can take many different forms. But at the end of the day, we are institutions of hope and opportunity for every last student that we bring into our walls. And it means that whenever we bring this amazing diversity of students from different backgrounds, different racial, ethnic, socioeconomic backgrounds, well-resourced high schools, poorly resourced high schools, and from around the world, that we need to create the conditions for them to succeed. That's our responsibility. And, I'll just give you one quick story from Wellesley. When I came, it was very clear we had these brilliant students, but we had collected some data that actually showed that some of the underrepresented students, underrepresented minorities, as well as from under-resourced high schools, were not persisting in STEM and other quantitative areas, economics, for example. And we measured it, looked at it. Now, some people drop off because that's what we do. We allow our students to explore and move to other areas. But we want that to be their decision. They should not feel as if that is because they are either lesser than or cannot succeed. And that became, I think, a hallmark of our focus on inclusive excellence and how we actually got the faculty and staff on board to make some very serious changes in our pedagogical approach. What is an inclusive classroom? What is it that we need to do to get students from under-resourced backgrounds to a level where by the next level of courses they are ready to take off, and where we can give students a science identity, and not just the students who've had deep experience, but students who are curious and that we have no idea what they're going to achieve. And I would say in the almost 10 years that I've been at Wellesley, we've doubled the number of underrepresented students from these underrepresented backgrounds who have been successful in STEM and other quantitative fields. And it means that...
Sorry, that was an applause line, I think, right?
Thank you. But what we cannot do is, because of the threats that we are faced with, we cannot stop that work, because our students know, and that gives them less hope. So they look at us as the leaders to keep moving. We might have to use slightly different language, and that's fine, but the essence, the mission, the purpose remains unchanged.
Amazing. Thank you. Totally true. We have only a few minutes remaining with this part of the session, but I hope we could turn finally to the role of leadership through institutions. And Paula, I'm going to go to you first because you've just, I think that's the perfect segue. But I did want to mention for a moment that I am sure that I am not alone in being incredibly proud of how this institution, Harvard University, has stood up in the last 18 months. And I want to just take a moment to say thank you for that. From the deans to the provost to the president to the overseers, the corporation, the leadership has been extraordinary, and I think we're all proud to be a part of it. And Paula, you are doing just the same thing at Wellesley College, and I wonder if you could we'll go down the line with a minute each or so, but please just speak about the role that you think institutions can play in this historic moment.
First of all, I just want to echo, John, your thanks to the leadership at Harvard. And my dear friend Alan and I trained together, by the way, and his wife, Anne, trained together in academic medicine. So it has truly been special to see your leadership here at Harvard. This is an important moment for higher education. It's an important moment for us to understand the roles that we play, not just as institutions that serve who is at our institutions, but as representative of what is so sacred in our country, what has been so unique, and what has actually been, quite frankly, a jewel in the crown of the United States. And this is a pivotal moment for us to continue our work in a steadfast way, but to also listen to the criticism, not be totally rejecting, understand, and I think I said this earlier, understand where there really are opportunities for us as institutions to evolve, and to also work together in ways that we might not have in the past. And one thing I've been thinking about as institutions, how we stepped up during COVID. It was an incredibly difficult time. It was a crisis. But we came together with a common purpose, save the lives make sure the students and faculty and staff on campus not only learned, but that they remained alive. But we did that in a way that we brought together the best knowledge and the true purpose of our institutions. And that, I believe, has really set the stage for the work we are doing together today as higher ed, together working to advance beyond these attacks. So I do think that there's tremendous opportunity for us, but again, leading with our values and really thinking about that higher purpose.
Thank you for that, Paula. Raphael, speaking of institutions with a spine, the Fed, which joins you and Dr. Simmons, is an important institution in these times. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so you might have heard the Fed has had some issues in terms of being challenged. One thing, I would just say this. Institutions writ large are critical for the effective functioning of society. And for our society, if you're going to have a lot of people be able to strive and achieve for things, you need to have structure that allows all of us to be able to benefit by it and all of us to be able to engage and indulge in it. And for me, I would say leadership is, in the rocky times, understanding who you are and what value you provide to that society and never wavering from that, even when things get difficult. And I would say Harvard's done a great job of that. I think the Fed has done a very good job of that. And it creates a trust and a calm and a steadiness that then allows a very complex economy and a very complex society to actually function. And when those things unravel, then the functioning unravels. And the things that have allowed America to be a great place, the things that have allowed academia to be transformative for people's lives, will stop happening. And then we're all worse off for that. So these are very critical things. And I'm actually fairly gratified that the examples that have been set, people have noticed them.
Absolutely.
And I think that noticing holds the promise of more people stepping forward to do the same thing. And that's really where I hope we go to in the months and the years to come.
Absolutely. I am quite confident the Fed has been seen in this setting. And Deborah, as a funder of the arts, I see institutions in the arts stepping up every day in quiet ways that are so important. How do you see this moment?
Well, first of all, I want to come at this from a slightly different angle.
Sure.
I think in terms of leadership, and this has perhaps been an age-old complaint, we need to listen to younger people. I have learned so much from people in their 20s who have so much more knowledge and so much of a broader vision. And I think when we talk about inclusion, we don't talk about this. And I see the radical difference that is made as we have trained young musicians to be citizen musicians, to watch their transformative effect upon their own institutions. But to get back to the broader world of institutions, you have to combine this with respect. And respect for what is venerable about institutions, but also what can change about them. And I was just an expert witness in Washington, D.C., because I'll give you an example of a kind of, I don't know if I'd call this innovation. I testified for the reasons that we should not change the name of the Kennedy Center to the Trump Kennedy Center. And about the sheer folly of trying to shut down an institution and a series of institutions, operas, symphonies, theaters, that plans 3 and 4 years in advance and say, in 6 months, you're finished. That is no respect for human beings or for process or for what is good about the venerable. So I think as institutions, we have to have the courage to stand up and say these things. We are no longer taking any money from the federal government. They only gave us a pittance anyway. We at the New York Philharmonic had a $100 million budget, and we got $100,000. We don't need their money. We don't need their imposing on us what they have been trying to do. And it is a message that could really undermine and rot so many aspects of society. So that's what I tried to do.
Very well said. Thank you. Val, before I wrap up and say thanks to all of you, you get the last word.
Well, I'll make it short, John. Thanks again, first of all, for having us. This has been really an incredible learning experience for me. One of my favorite phrases is a Helen Keller quote, which is, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. So if you substitute the word institution for together, I think it sums up why they're important in our society, and it's why good leadership is so important in making those institutions effective and getting them to move the ball in so many ways. So I know we've got our share of issues in college sports right now. There's a lot of fracturing in our space about how to take the sector forward. And I'm hoping former Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker, who's now the head of the NCA, he's done a very good job of listening, leading, and we're looking to him to help keep the institution rolling forward so that, again, everything that's great about college sports can endure in the years ahead.
Well, thank you. Before we take a break, let me just conclude very briefly to say I've been listening through this panel, trying to channel Dr. Simmons to do good listening, to find some beautiful words that each of you have offered, and there are way too many, which is so great. There's so many lessons, and I agree with you, Val. This has been a wonderful learning experience. But I took one word from each of your initial opening statements that for me resonate relative to Dr. Simmons. Paula, you mentioned mentorship. there's no question Dr. Simmons is a mentor to me and to many others, and that is an extraordinary legacy. Raphael, you mentioned excellence. There is no question but that Dr. Simmons stands for excellence in everything she has touched and how important that is to leadership. Deborah, you mentioned discipline. And I do think before we do multidisciplinary things, we have to master our disciplines. We have to do that in such a powerful way. And of course, Dr. Simmons is a model of that. And last, Val, you mentioned courage. And Dr. Simmons, I think when I think about the courageous leadership that you've had across 3 institutions of higher education and in everything you've done, you are truly an icon to all of us. Please join me in thanking this brilliant panel. And thank you so much.
I want to thank John and all of our esteemed panelists for that thought-provoking conversation. Thank you so much. We'll now break for lunch, and we'll reconvene promptly at noon for our afternoon session honoring Ruth Simmons. Thank you.